So loud.
I felt, good. It's because I had protein for lunch. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the meeting, our workshop meeting this Tuesday, February 11th, Delray Beach City Commission. If we may have the roll.
Commissioner Markert.
Here.
Deputy Vice Mayor Long.
Here.
Vice Mayor Cassell.
Here.
Commissioner Burns.
Here.
Mayor Carney.
Present.
We have a quorum.
First item is on the Delray Beach Memorial Gardens Municipal Cemetery Historic Resource Survey presentation.
Good afternoon. There we go. Good afternoon again.
Hello.
Anthea Gediotis, Development Services Director. With me is Michelle Hoyland, who is the Principal Planner in charge of Historic Preservation. And before she gives you a quick overview, I'm going to be quick. I do want to take a minute to acknowledge this is the 5th small matching grant that Michelle has secured for the city. And because we are a certified local government, meaning that our Historic Preservation Board has the expertise to review the applications in front of it. We actually don't match, so it's a bit of a misnomer for us.
Oh,
so
that's
when
even better.
Exactly. So they're up to $50,000. And this is the latest version. All of the efforts we've made have been to sort of increase public access to historic documents. And I know we're in a hurry, so I'm going to let Michelle take this one away. It's actually, I think, something that our residents, particularly those who have family members in the cemetery, will appreciate to see how it works. So, Michelle?
Hello, good evening, afternoon. Michelle Hoyland, Principal Planner, Development Services. And also quickly, it's important to acknowledge Katharina Paliwoda, who works as Senior Planner in our division. She was instrumental in helping us prepare and execute the grant that we got from the state of Florida for this project. So the city cemetery, we're going to start first with what we're talking about. It is located in the southwest neighborhood between Atlantic Avenue and Southwest 10th Street, along the west side of Southwest 8th Avenue, just east of 95. It contains almost 30 acres. The northeast corner of the cemetery has about 5 acres in it, and it is what we've learned, and we knew, but we've learned for sure, the historic section. I've also included here a policy that's in our comprehensive plan, which mandated that we look at studying the cemetery for historic designation in the future. So here's a image here of, we're going to go into some more maps later on, but this is giving you a bird's eye view of where the historic piece is. So the commission approved in 22. As you know, whenever we apply for grants, we come and tell you this is what we'd like to apply for, and you gave us the approval to proceed. The $50,000 technically small matching grant, we can qualify for up to 2 of those a year. In this cycle, we applied for 1, and we do kind of applaud ourselves because it's the first time that we've received federal funding. So every year the federal government gives those historic applicants, only 3 of them, federal dollars. And we were number 3 on the list. So this was partly funded from the National Park Service and partly funded from the state legislature. That is a testament to the goodness of the project and the quality of the application. So you have in your backup the resource survey, which looks like this. It's a great document to read. I'm not going to go through every single detail of it. The abridged version.
The bridge version, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
So it contains report, analysis, history, methodology of what happened. So essentially, we hired the consultant who came out, mobilized in the field. They actually worked very quickly with us because these are timed projects. And they began studying all of the northeast corners. So the threshold was everything 50 years or older, or right on the cusp of that 50 years. And some of you may remember discussion around the time of this being in the ground here, this happening with the flags, and some of the flags had gone missing. So the flags were the markers, so they took GPS coordinates that they plugged into a system. They were looking at over 1,200 graves. This is a 1950s view of the cemetery. It was originally created in the early 1900s, and this is a 1968 view. So just to slow down for a moment and back up, why is it important that we study the cemetery? So we're looking at how did it get there? Who is buried there? Why can we record it for future reference for people doing research, genealogy, ancestry research? And can we do any kind of potential designation with the cemetery? If you designate and it qualifies for historic designation, you could qualify for grants. And that could be for things that you do to improve the cemetery, depending on what boundary you put around the historic section. So it was founded in 1902. For some of you history nerds, you might remember that there was discussion of the Bay Ridge Cemetery, which was on the Barrier Island before we were building houses out there. That those folks that were buried there were relocated to Pine Ridge Cemetery. That's what we originally called it in 1902. There's a storied history of it being owned in private ownership and then the city taking the cemetery over, and the city has done a fantastic job through Public Works, Parks and Rec, working together to maintain the cemetery. I don't think people recognize this photo, but this is taken from our cemetery. It's really quite beautiful and peaceful there. So there's many people buried that are pioneer families here at the City of Delray. We have a diverse community of settlement here at the city where we had people from the north and the south and the islands coming here, black and white and Asian coming and settling in our city and pioneering our city. So what you see on the left is the Link headstone, and this is for the Link family, for which Catherine Strong is, her maiden name is Link. And so she's buried there, and you can see on her headstone, it's the first woman mayor of Delray Beach on her inscription. So there's quite a bit of history out there. We also have Fagan Henry, who was the city's first black pioneer, the town at that time. And him and his wife came from Gadsden County, and they established Homestead here and were very instrumental in establishing the neighborhood. Same year, William Linton came to do development, the same year Fagan came. So our report is available online where you can go and read it. And we'll talk a little bit in a second here about the historic integrity, but I wanted to show this to the public so that they have an opportunity to see the report for themselves. There's also a map. So down below the report, you can see New Delray Beach Memorial Garden Municipal Cemetery Historic GIS map. So what that is all of those GIS or GPS points gets plugged into a database that gets put onto what is a technical term, GIS, but it's a spatial map. And I have a little video here. I'm going to press start, but you can see this is a screen recording video of that GIS map. And so if you zoom in, and I'm going to click on a point in the upper right-hand corner to show you an individual burial and how it was recorded. There's a photograph for each burial. And then here we have Hattie Mitchell. She's grave 1. The photo you can click on, and if there's more photos, you can click on them too, and it will pop out. The database gives all kinds of description info here about their born date, their death date, the GPS coordinates, and this is really valuable information for a variety of populations, but even I think for us, we're heavily focused on the black population, which for people who are interested in history or who may not know this, many black people can only research their history so far back, given the roots of what was happening here in the United States. And so being able to identify family, your family, where you came from, and to be able to have that access to research through online, all of these efforts alone were so valuable for the grant that we were able to pull this together and then provide this information. I'm sure the Palm Beach County Genealogical Society will be able to utilize this as well. It's just a really wonderful tool. I myself got quite involved in searching my ancestral history in the beginning of COVID when I couldn't leave the house. So it's just really interesting. So the recommendations of the report include designating the cemetery, the northeast 5 acres, on the local end. It would qualify for National Register of Historic Places. The report recommends techniques to restore clean headstones, which there are professionals who can do that, the methods to do it, and how to pull somebody in through a contract. Maintenance for ourselves and repair. And I know that's Michael Weiner's phone, so you should turn your volume down, please.
Could be Price, he's searching for his too.
Who is it? So our Parks and Rec department has received the report, and they have the methods for any kind of maintenance and repair that they might do moving forward, and they're doing a great job so far taking care of the cemetery. Signage is a really important piece. So interestingly, not only do you have people coming through to do family research, but going to a cemetery is also a pretty popular destination for professionals in professional organizations, kids in school. They like to have, teachers like to take them there for field trips. So the report talks about some wayfinding that can be done, historic designation markers, and so it goes through more in depth than I am here. This is the criteria for eligibility, which is also outlined in the report. Does the property have an association with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history? Is it associated with the lives of significant people in our past? Does the cemetery embody the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, method of construction, represent the work of a master, possess high artistic values, significant with an entity, and then, has it yielded or is it likely to yield information about prehistoric history, or history? So we meet these categories to be qualifying for historic designation. If it were to be designated, these are the grants that are available. There are many out there, but these are the quick search ones that most people are looking at. Right now, African American cemetery grants are at the top of the federal list for money being given. The National Park Service is also looking at abandoned cemeteries. Not that this is an abandoned cemetery, but we could get monies for things like improvements, programming, signage, things like that. The report was presented to the board on January 15th, and the board recommended that the property be added to the local register of historic places, and that there be continued efforts to keep going with some of the research recommended in the report. There is a historic funeral route that was identified. Some of the funeral homes weren't available when they were trying to get information, so the report could be built out even more with the history and information for the city. So at this point, staff wants to thank the City Commission, I do, for giving us the approval to go after this grant, receive it, and do this study, which further enriches our history in the city. And we ask for your direction on how you would like us to proceed. If we're proceeding with designation, would it be local, national, both? And would you like us to continue the efforts for further research and potentially seeking grants in the future?
Thank you very much. I'm actually one of those ones that goes, when I visit a city, I do go to old cemeteries. I think this is a great project. I don't think, from my standpoint, I would, if we could get some kind of direction that you just go forward, get your application. If you get the national, that's even better. But, I think you should at least get what you can get.
Okay.
Yes? All in
I'm in
agreement?
agreement with it,
Absolutely.
Okay. You don't need, we're just giving direction now, right?
I was just going to say, I don't know if you want to open it up to public comment for that portion, just because it was on the agenda.
We have a
as well.
really big agenda, the item coming up,
Okay.
and I think everyone is kind of in agreement, so I'm just going to
Right.
take my best shot saying we don't really need to have public comment. So,
Okay,
Can we
thank
do
you.
that though? I mean, are we allowed to just? I
We
hate
can-
to.
we can do-
We could
yeah.
ask the public kindly not to come up, but shouldn't we open it as a matter of rule? We can't. We.
Anybody's interested in
Yeah.
is
I
there
think we
anybody
need to-
interested in speaking? Seeing none?
Thank you, Mayor.
So just to clarify,
Huh?
I just got a message on my cell phone. Don't do it.
Okay.
Just to clarify, we're going to apply for local and national, and then I don't know if you said it, but the HPB said continue efforts with further research for future reports. Would that be part of your direction as
Yes,
well?
I would
Yes.
say yes. That's
Yeah, and if I
complete
can,
package, yes.
Thank
may I
you.
just
Sorry,
say,
yes.
thank you so much for getting that funding for us. We know that
Yeah.
funding is very hard to come by these days, so I'm sure it was your application that did it, and I just want to say thank you so
Oh,
much. I
thank you
appreciate
so
you.
much.
Great.
Michelle, I wanted to say thank you to the pre-materials that you sent out that we had a chance to read before were really, for someone who doesn't know much about cemeteries, I learned a ton from the documents, so I appreciate the work that went into
Oh.
getting those materials to us.
Thank you. We love a good news item.
Great work, thank you.
Great work.
Thank you so much.
Direction given.
Absolutely.
Okay. Second item on the agenda is the Atlantic Avenue Historic Resource Survey, which is including, there's a lot of different things. And with a little bit of indulgence, I got a little statement I want to make here. This workshop is a long time coming, and I want to express my gratitude to the city manager and planning staff for their help in moving the question of how to best preserve Atlantic Avenue. It is very important that we do what we can to protect the charm and character of our main street. I have said I'm committed to the goal of protecting it, and during my campaign, I responded to a historic advocacy organization questionnaire stating unequivocally my position. Apparently, there are still some who said I changed my position from the campaign, so I'm going to read this little thing that I did, that statement that I gave to the Historic Preservation Trust. Yes, I support the goal of an Atlantic Avenue Historic District. The avenue is our gem. It must be protected in order to have the quaint downtown that drew all of us here. We need to do a number of things, however. First, property owners must not be penalized because they own historic district property. They need a fair and timely process of review of building applications. We should also create, with the input of stakeholders, special design guidelines for the avenue so that we can provide the guidance to the property owners. This way, if they meet these guidelines, the process should be swift. We can't ask property owners who pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to wait months and months for approval or denial. We need to do better and also help educate people on the deferred taxes and economic benefits of owning historic property.
Mayor,
So,
is this,
I'm
like,
speaking.
I know, but
Thank
is
you.
this appropriate in a workshop to be
I'm the
making
chair.
this statement?
Yes.
Okey doke.
Okay.
You got it.
With the indulgence of the commission, is this all right? Yes, okay, good. Yes, so you can see my position hasn't changed since I took office. I have met with stakeholders to discuss a variety of ideas. The planning director has been part of those meetings and some of those meetings and has asked time to flesh out some of the options. The purpose of today's workshop is to have our staff present these options, ask for public input and ideas, and see if my fellow commissioners have a consensus to move forward. Our goal is to find a mechanism for the protection that has the support from property owners along Atlantic Avenue and the citizens of Delray Beach. And we should note that the organization representing these owners, the Downtown Development Authority, has already voted no on a historic district. After doing some research, it seems that among the options being presented, the Conservation District has many of the criteria that we are looking for. And also, but one of the remaining pieces is a restriction that deals with the aggregation of properties. We all saw the disappointing result when Atlantic Crossing was developed. The design certainly has not added to the charm of the street, and in my opinion, and had we had these restrictions in place, that would not have happened. It is also important that the permitting process be fair and non-arbitrary. Property owners have to have confidence in the integrity of the process. There has been a number of issues related to the historic preservation process, and there are fears that this process devalues it or somehow creates problems with their property ownership. Alternatively, the planning and zoning review process seems to have earned the vote of confidence, and I think that should also weigh heavily in what we deliberate today. Whatever we decide, the review process has to be fair to everyone. And specifically, I would like all the advocates of a historic district to tell us how we are going to make historic preservation process fair, non-arbitrary, non-cumbersome. And with that in mind, I recognize Anthea Gianotis,
Wait, if-
head of development. I've recognized Anthea
Could I be
Gianotis.
entertained since you were entertained? And we're all even up here.
Right, except I'm the chair, and I've just
I
recognized.
know, but I'm
You'll
asking,
get your chance.
no, I'd like to be entertained now in light of that statement.
You will have your chance
So
to
you're
speak.
saying I can't be entertained?
That's what I'm saying. You will
Okay,
have your
thank you.
chance to speak. Anthea, you are recognized.
Okay, we'll go over the presentation that staff has pulled together. It's brief. We're not going to represent the resource survey, which is it is attached as backup to this item. Basically, we're here because almost 10 years ago, the City Commission created the Historic Task Force. And the goal of the task force was to find ways to strengthen historic preservation efforts in the city. There were 3 specific recommendations related to new districts. Those included studying and considering creating the Frog Alley District, looking at the North Swinton Avenue corridor, and Atlantic Avenue. When we undertook the Always Del Rey Comprehensive Plan update, which was a multi-year process, these recommendations appear as established policies in the comp plan. So to conduct the cultural resource survey, to identify where a district could be established. So in 2021, the city contracted with Rich J. Heisenbottle Architects, RJ Heisenbottle Architects. We did have as you can see in the background, that the analysis does the full corridor from I-95 to Ocean Boulevard. If anybody wants to see the full presentation on this, staff did an excellent job. On April 19th, 2023, all of our meetings are available online. I strongly recommend that you go and watch the full presentation there. I did put the COVID delay in there, so if you ask me why it took 2 years, you've all kind of forgotten it, but it did disrupt everything for a while. So just to kind of boil it down, again, the idea, we studied the entire corridor. There were separate recommendations made for the property east of the Intercoastal. There wasn't enough fabric on the west, although the report recognizes the Weidman building. But the area that is identified with a period of a concentration of buildings for the period of significance basically extends from Swinton to the Intercoastal Waterway. Now, I do think it's important to note that when you see this orange shading, these are the properties that are already designated through the Old School Square Historic District. And over here, next to the Intercoastal, the green properties indicate those that are in the Marina Historic District. So some of these parcels are, already under the purview of the Historic Preservation Board and the protections in 451. Blue, for those who are watching, are the proposed contributors, and yellow are the buildings that are not considered to be contributors. The other way around. I read it. I'm so sorry. Thank you. That's why you're here. No. So proposed contributors are yellow. I was just thinking it looked wrong. And blue is non-conforming. I've had trouble with these colors the entire time, so I'm sure I did it wrong, of course. All right, so yellow is contributing. Veterans Park, for example, which is also something we're going to talk about at the very end, the Old School Square Complex, etc. So what does this boil down to, considering sort of the bookends of part of the proposed district are already preserved? Oh, and I do want to point out that there are stars here. For example, the Colony Hotel is already individually listed. So at any rate, okay. So within the district, there are 70 proposed properties. There are 70 properties proposed for the Atlantic Avenue Historic District. 14 of those properties are already within either the Old School Square Historic District or the Marina Historic District. So the Atlantic Avenue would be comprised of 44 contributors. 10 are already in a district, which means 34 properties that are identified as contributors would be protected that do not currently have historic protections. So I think that's important. One of these, for example, we always call it the Popcorn Building. This is the oldest building in the city, right? This is it. It's 122 years old. It's currently for sale. So, and it's commercial. You'll remember that in this analysis, we had a symposium. We've done a tremendous amount of public outreach. We sent direct mail specific invitations to every single property owner. 10 took us up on it, but they actually represented 22 properties. So it was people who owned multiple properties. And they were able to talk to us sort of one-on-one about what their concerns were. We were able to go over what the report said for their specific properties. We had the symposium in October of 2023. where we discussed the concepts of preservation, the law behind whether or not it was legal to do new districts. Newsflash, it is. The economics behind designation and different incentives. We had a lot of conversation about incentives. We had a specific workshop about it in February. These weren't the only ones that were discussed. There are tax benefits that I think are largely overlooked for commercial properties. However, I left this slide in specifically because when we just did the in lieu changes to that ordinance, we did take some of the concepts coming out of that for historic properties, additions and other things, being able to use in lieu with no limitation, whereas normally it's 30%, things like that. So we've had a long list of work on this starting in July of 2022, where the previous commission reviewed the report, directed staff to work on the creation of a new district. HPB recommended approval, the DDA recommended denial, Planning and Zoning Board recommended approval. Then we had the outreach, and then ultimately the last direction we had, we were considering goal setting. Do we move forward? Do we not? And still, we're worried about Atlantic. So we're here today. So we've heard all kinds of things from both sides, that Atlantic Avenue should have been designated years ago, concerns about property rights and economic impacts to property owners, concerns that I can't change anything, concerns that, well, I can't park it, so I'm not gonna change anything, what are you worried about, and on and on. The basic, takeaway is that, we love our Main Street, and there's been changes over time, some of which I think we're all fine with. For example, Bull Bar it's not Bull Bar anymore, but it's 115 years old, and it has definitely changed over time. It is currently a contributing structure within the Old School Square Historic District, and according to the property appraiser, it sold 2 years ago for over $7 million. It's a small property, so certainly reasonable use of land maintains itself if you have a district. One of the best restaurants in town, a contributing structure, changed use, and there are all kinds of incentives that exist in the code today to facilitate adaptive reuse, and whether it's historic or not historic. And then this is another great example. The building that has the Capital One Cafe in it was constructed in 1928. It is not in either district, and it has been identified as a contributor, even though the facade has changed over time. So we've also, I think, want to take a minute and talk about process, because the concern about process taking longer, process, being more or more difficult. So the zoning isn't changing. Everybody is central business district zoning in this proposed district, right? So what happens if you are a historic property, like say the Colony or Elizabetta's or somebody like that, is that your facade changes are reviewed for that building's architecture, its period of significance. There are additional findings that other central business district properties are not held to for the Secretary of the Interior. However, the way that the code is structured now, with the changes that were made under the last go-around, it even reinforced it more, is the Historic Preservation Board is kind of a one-stop shop for waivers, variances, other things. They can hear and decide the entire site plan in one meeting, and then it's appealable report, of course, to the sport. The other big difference, again, there is no limit on the amount of in lieu parking you can utilize if you are a historic property. Other properties, there's no limit on adaptive reuse, but additions or new construction are limited to 30%. Demolition is not easier if you are designated. It just isn't. You are going to go to the board, they're going to review it, and they are going to make a recommendation. And if you're tearing something down, you have to have what you're replacing it with ready to go. In the central business district, if you're not historic, you could tear a property down and you don't have to have something to replace it currently. So it's maybe not the wisest financial move, but things have happened, and they do. So when I talk about that difference between CBD versus historic, in the report, for example, the report identifies 4 mission-style buildings, and then it identifies 2 Mediterranean Revival buildings. When you look at the architectural design guidelines for the Central Business District, The different styles, and it says at the very beginning of the book, are purposely, I'm going to go back to the Mediterranean Revival one because that was my example, are purposely broad so that in the Central Business District regulations, the Mediterranean Revival style actually encompasses both a more sober mission style and a more ornate Mediterranean Revival style. So it's left it quite broad because all of these things fit in downtown. Preservation reinforces the actual architecture of the building itself. And I think it's important to say that preservation goes beyond style. We're talking about craftsmanship that doesn't exist anymore. We're talking about materials in some cases that doesn't exist anymore. So it is more detailed, and it does have a higher scrutiny associated with it. So I think a lot of what is also giving us angst that I wanted to talk about a little bit is sort of this slide used to be titled, "What are we worried about?" And then I was like, that just sounds a little too casual. So I think it comes down to the changes that we have, what is consistent and what is not consistent with our vision of what our city is, right? So I'm going to start with this project right here. Keep your eye here, right? All right, that became Urban Outfitters. Probably the storefront I get the most complaints about. Even to this day, people don't like it. When that change happened, we brought in the architectural design guidelines to not have such an austere type of architecture, kind of stripping down an existing building into something a little bit more foreign. But to be fair, these architecture design guidelines also embraced more modern language. And this sort of reskinning of the SunTrust building is consistent with those guidelines. It's a departure. I get mixed reviews on this. So this is not me making judgment calls on style. I'm just saying that we were worried about this. We used this tool. That still allows this result. Are we okay or are we not with this? And then the bigger issue that the mayor alluded to, I think, in his comments is, I don't know if everybody knows what this is. Here's the Colony Hotel. Here's Blue Gallery. This is Atlantic going towards the beach. This is what was there before this came in. So we don't like change, and I don't know that, this was smaller in scale, but there are shortcomings in this with the service station on the corner, a lot of parking in the front, a lot of asphalt in this picture. But the scale of what came in after it to this day still causes our community angst, right? So this is somehow not consistent with where we think we're going. Then this is Atlantic Avenue here. This is Swinton. So this is now turning into Sunday Village. This was protected by historic. The other one was a SPRAB approval. This one is HPB. So the issue of aggregation, I tend to say agglomeration. I meant to look up which one was right. Maybe they both are. That is a big factor. That ability to combine parcels, abandon alleys and streets is what facilitates Worthing Place, right? Because you couldn't park this if you didn't get control of the alleys. So that's a big factor. So is it preservation of the buildings the way they are in their craftsmanship and their architecture? Is it the scale of the infill? I think if you can help us identify what the goal is, the tool is different, right? So certainly limiting the ability to do unified site plans for parcels, that are on the Ave would be a big step towards preservation, whether or not there's a formal district or not. So designation is legally supportable. We've got architecture design guidelines in place. We've talked about changing them and removing the masonry modern from the palette. Demolition isn't occurring though. So the only time we really see the projects demolishing fully is when they have been aggregated with other parcels, all of the 3 projects I showed you. And then, however, without preservation, the facades change, or the Urban Outfitters changes, the Hands building changes. And whether or not that's an improvement or not is part of the discussion of what is the right tool, because those improvements use the architecture design guidelines. So a historic designation doesn't freeze buildings in time. It just requires that you reinforce the existing architecture. And there are benefits. There's, the tax incentives that are available. They take a little paperwork, but I think they're underutilized, and so there might be more opportunities for education for us. So what was interesting, though, is we've taken all of these steps in our LDRs over time to try to preserve the Ave. We reduced the height to 3 stories. We require retail on the ground floor. We did the design guidelines. We have a form-based code that has actually won an award. So we've done some things to maintain our Main Street already, which is our part of the tools that a conservation district uses that we never needed to establish a conservation district to do. But we were asked to look into conservation districts, and these are usually areas that, might qualify in the future. They don't now. They're important to preserve for their social or economic value or some other reason. We do have comprehensive plan policies that support looking into and adopting conservation districts. And in fact, while we've been working on this project, the other project of Frog Alley may end up needing a conservation district solution just based on the results of that research. Staff has been looking at like 60 plus conservation districts, and what we've learned is that they are more flexible in terms of a designation. We can focus the amount or the type of regulation for our local situation if we can identify and articulate it, and it's an investment in character. So some of the things that would be perhaps a conservation district you would need a tool from is if you wanted to add additional protection against demolition or the facade, the full scale facade changes to contributors. You would have to identify contributors, non-contributors still. Michelle and Amy have been educating me on the difference, and I've never worked with one, but it's sort of like historic preservation light. So this is definitely a tool we could use. But again, there's already a lot of the components of a district in place. We have a form-based code. We have architecture design guidelines. We require the active uses on the ground floor. We have limited Atlantic Avenue to 3 stories. So perhaps there's just an LDR amendment or tweak that would be sufficient to discourage the aggregation and full-scale redevelopment. So these are the sort of the options that we're bringing to you. So it basically is we move forward with the district. We establish a conservation district that perhaps could incorporate that demolition review or other specific reviews that are important. This would take an ordinance for LDR amendments. We don't have even a definition of conservation district, and the one that is commonly used was a bit of a mouthful. There's a slide, and I just didn't even include it. So we would have some work to do there. And then ultimately, if it's not a conservation district with demolition controls or facade controls, and it's more about maintaining the current parcelization on the Ave, we could do that through an LDR amendment, and we can adjust the architectural design guidelines that we were about to move forward with removing masonry modern. These are discussions we've had at the board previously. So if there's other concerns, that would be the time where we could add more to the architecture design guidelines. And then the other option is simply to end the process. So if you want to give us direction, I usually just make those to try to corral the conversation. And then while we're talking about the report, Veterans Park has been raised. The trust has offered a request to designate Veterans Park and place it on the local register of historic places. I'm sure you've all seen certainly the resolution. Mr. Patton came to a fairly recent city commission meeting and passed it out. And then just to add to that, this effort did also look at Veterans Park and it is yellow, which means it is a contributor. so it certainly was determined to have characters for the potential district, specifically its place as a longstanding public green space for residents, and then also the adult recreation center, the shuffleboard courts, the extent to which preservation of the park is desired. Those we just would need our marching orders, if any. So that concludes our presentation. I have Amy Alvarez, Assistant Director, who was the city's historic preservation planner in the past, and I have our current historic preservation planner here. So once you've had public comment, we're here to help. So thank you.
Thank you. You have nothing to add at this time, correct? Okay. We're going to be opening this up to the public. I want to caution, because we only have so much time and we really do want to try to get to everything. So to the extent that you have somebody speaking that you're going to say the exact same thing on, if you could, when you get your chance, abridge it and ditto the other person's contract to get yourself in the record, but you know, kind of move the conversation along, that would be very helpful, right? I mean, we have a lot to say. So I am going to open this up. Is there anything, okay, I'm sorry.
Vice Mayor was waiting on her turn to speak.
Did you want to speak now before the public?
It's fine.
Okay.
Sure. I just wanted to mention that 7G also does have a limit for the workshop minutes of public comment of 30 minutes. If you guys want to stay to that, obviously the board has the discretion to
Well,
make any adjustments.
we have a hard stop here at 5 o'clock. I don't know how much the commission is probably going to have a very, extensive conversation. Public comment in the rules have said 30 minutes. Do we want to, well, we lost one. Do we want to allow for an expansion of that time, or do we want to wait to get to 30 minutes and then see if we want to expand it at that point? Okay.
Why don't we wait to get there?
All right, so what we're going to do is we have a 30-minute time limit for public comment, and hopefully we can get everything into 30 minutes. If we can't, then we obviously will extend it to the extent we can, as long as the commission has sufficient time to do its deliberation. So, any of those wishing to speak, come up to the lectern, give your name and address. And I will say you each have 3 minutes, but that would mean only 10 people can speak, so if you can do it quickly, that would be great.
This is on.
It is on.
Hello, everybody. My name is Joyce Mooney, and I'm a full-time resident at 516 Northeast 8th Avenue, Delray Beach. I worry that I'm in favor of historic designation for Atlantic Avenue, and of course also for Veterans Park, and for the Popcorn House and anything else that has been discussed. The idea that we can ask owners of private property that is not historic to please be nice and keep to some of our guidelines for the avenue, I don't think will work. And this morning's paper shows that doesn't work. The FIU study saying affordable housing is getting scarce. One of the reasons is because this commission and this county commission has asked developers to stick to the, whatever it is, 23% affordable housing in their properties development. And they come back and say, oh, I'm sorry, I just can't do more than 12%. And you say, okay, 12%. And so we don't have enough affordable housing. So I think you cannot count on the goodwill and the niceness of developers or property owners on Delray Beach's best street. And we need to keep track of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Mooney. What are we doing now? Making them 2 minutes?
We're setting the time for each speaker to not exceed 3 minutes. However, I'm keeping time for 30 separately.
Okay.
Ready?
Ms. Oxford.
Hi, Linda Oxford, 148 Coconut Road. In 1902, my grandfather arrived in Delray Beach, and he constructed his house. And then the family followed from Michigan and settled in 1903. His residence was on the corner of Northeast 5th Avenue and Atlantic, which is where the Popcorn House sits. My mother was born there. In 1925, he built 6 properties, which are now rented, which go on 5th and Atlantic Avenue. I would hate to see the change. Well, let me just say, that block looks so much like it did when I was a child growing up, the block across the street, and even somewhat going, the Colony block does, except for the corner. It's part of the charm of Delray, and we need to keep it. I am a former member of the Delray Beach Preservation Trust, and I know that they have done so much good for our community in doing everything. But there has to be some kind of a gray area to please the Historic Trust and the owners. And I was researching the Conservation District, and it seems like that kind of works with what we need to do. I just want Delray to be quaint, inviting, no high rises, no more than 3 stories now? Whatever. So whatever you could do, I would appreciate it. And I also have to say, that whole property that I mentioned, the 7 properties, my family sold it in 1969 for $92,000. So
Can't think about that, Linda.
I don't. And my mother, was born in 1913, she was happy to leave the property. It gave all the descendants enough money and my parents to be able to buy a house. And that's all they ever wanted. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zucker.
Good afternoon. Price Batten, 1020 Tamron Road, president of the Delray Beach Preservation Trust. I'd just like to say, reject that final option about stopping and doing nothing.
I don't think really that one's on the table. I appreciate her doing it, but
let's make sure we don't do that. The trust we're not a monolithic operation. We listen and we observe and we analyze. There just hasn't been a lot to analyze yet. What we really want you guys to do is to start moving forward and let's setting some you guys deciding on some ideas that you like, so we can look at them and comment on them. I don't disagree that we don't all pretty much have the same goal of doing it. Right now, the best goal I've seen is the creation of a historic district, and that has been going back since that started. Unlike the staff report, that started in 2016, when City Manager Jelen was an assistant city manager. So this has been going on for a long time. And all we ask is that for you guys to give some very definite direction to staff on what you like and what you don't like, so then we can analyze it and maybe, come up with something better. But right now, I think the best thing is an historic district still. So I'd like to resubmit our resolution of 2023 for the record on the trust resolution. If that's okay.
That's fine.
And I'm looking forward to your discussion because I think this is an important start to where we want to go. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Patton.
Oh, really quickly, I got a minute left. I'm not going to use it all. Veterans Park. Again, our only ask on Veterans Park is that you, as owners of the park, you agree to send our report to staff, which is part of the requirements of the application, and then we'll see what our staff thinks about it. I think they'll agree. But we'll never know until you guys as owners sign off on the application. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners, City staff. My name is Joy Howell, and I live at 25 Northwest 24th Court, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the goal of preserving Atlantic Avenue. I'm here on my own behalf, although I'm a former president of the Preservation Trust, a former 2-term planning and zoning member, and a former steering committee member of the Always Delray Comprehensive Plan. I was fortunate to serve with many board members of the Delray Beach Preservation Trust, and I thank them for their tireless advocacy for all things historic. I'd like to see a historic district also, but I feel like that we have to be realistic. I know that as in many towns, property owners are concerned about the amount of time and the way the historic preservation review goes, and that it goes too long, and they're worried that their property values will be harmed. There's good data to show that that's not the case. There's good economic data, and Thea and her staff presented a really good presentation on that a couple of years ago. But I'm not sure that that's trickled down, if you will. I think there was one property owner from Atlantic Avenue at that workshop. And I think we still have some more work to do, particularly given the DDA stance on this with the property owners who are most effective. And if you look at some of the cities that I've looked at in doing my research on it, for example, Savannah, it clearly states in there that you have to have the property owners who are actually affected come forward and ask for the historic protection. I don't think we have that here. And also, I would say that in two of the cases that I looked at, St. Augustine and Savannah, they have time limits on the reviews. In one case, in Savannah, it's 45 days, I believe. And in St. Augustine, our nation's oldest city, with a lot of historic districts and conservation districts, basically, they let the applicants know almost immediately if they're missing things from the application. Within 20 days, the city lets the applicant know if there are minor things missing, and within 30 days, they have to have a hearing. So there's some certainty for applicants. I believe that in the goal of preserving and protecting Atlantic Avenue, it's a goal we all share. And that right now, from what I can see, based on the good research and presentation by city planning, that conservation districts have a lot of merit. They give us more flexibility while giving cities the ability to control demolition and to have a more robust architectural design guidelines. I hope you'll consider it in some fashion. It apparently is something pretty flexible, and maybe it would be something that we could work with here in Delray. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Howell.
Okay, I'll be brief because she practically said what I was going to say. I'm Stephanie Immelman from the Chamber of Commerce, and I think we all share the same goal of keeping our downtown charming and authentic. We all want that. I'm hoping you can thread the needle between a full-on historic district overlay, but to still keep the charm and to prevent agglomeration as well. So if there's somewhere between a historic district and a conservation district, or just adding to our amendments or LDRs to prevent some of the things that we don't want, that's something I think that the chamber would advocate for. We sent you a letter several months ago, so it's all in the letter. I won't belabor it, but I just wanted to make our stance clear today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Immelman.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. Irene Revelis from 331 East Atlantic Avenue. Our building was built in 1918, so it's one of the oldest ones on the avenue. It is also one of the very few historic structures, or any structure on the avenue, that has multiple residential units on the second floor. Ditto what Joy Howell said. I was pleased to be at a fact-finding meeting that the mayor had about the historic district, and at that time Mr. Harden, our former city manager, brought up the idea of a conservation district. I hadn't heard of it before. I don't know anything about it, but it sounded like certainly something we could explore. I've also heard that conservation districts, some people get that confused with environmental conservation, and that they can often be called heritage districts. At that same meeting, Michael Weiner, a local attorney here, mentioned that Delray Beach had the distinction of being the city in Florida that had the shortest distance from the I-95 exit to A1A. So I'm not certain if we take the approach of a conservation or heritage district, why we have to limit it to these few blocks that have the largest volume of designated properties. Why couldn't we make a heritage or conservation district from I-95 to the beach? Last but not least, through the excellent presentations that have been done by city staff, one thing that is very important to me, we really respect and love the owner of our building. They make a great place to live. They're great landlords. And we see, those of us who live there every day, see the difficulties of the burdens that a historic structure gets put with. So what I'd like to do is just ask that this information be shared with the commissioners. What I've done is I've taken the verbiage from what Anthea and Michelle have put together in terms of incentives. I think that's where we're falling short, is we need much more specificity, not on the ideas of incentives, but more specificity with them down to building by building. All historic buildings are not created equal. On my corner, we have right now almost 12,000 square feet of empty commercial space in the four corners of Northeast, 4th, and Atlantic Avenue. Those are all historic buildings. They all have no parking. So I think that, we need to look at each building individually, and some buildings may need incentives that are different from what are needed for other buildings. I thank you for your time, and I appreciate your efforts.
Thank you very much.
Michael Weiner, somehow the center of attention. I am the proud owner of 44 East Atlantic, and I am now getting close to owning it for 30% of the time it's been up. It will have my mark. I'm proud of that, and I'm proud that I was able to do it in Delray Beach, Florida. Quickly to the point, there is no equality sign between historic and the word charm, between historic and the word eclectic. We've survived on charm and eclectic on the beach to I-95, not necessarily historic. For me, personally, the most offensive structure is that faux moderne that Mercer Wenzel became. I don't know whether or not that would be possible or impossible under historic, but what I'm saying is it's fine to make control. It is fine to decide that aggregation is not what's in our best interests, but to think that somehow or another taking the remnants of 5 or 6 different styles, because there's not just one style we're trying to protect, or we won't have a 7th style if we just decide that historic is our protection. And I don't know, if Frank Gehry came to me, I would fight for my building even though it's designated historic. The Brutalist just came out, Cabassier. I mean, there are things, we want things to happen along this. And taste is in the eye of the beholder. We've done a good job of letting it be eclectic. I hope that was less than 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Wine.
Good afternoon, Sandy Zeller, 209 Northwest 12th Street. I wanted to address my comments to Veterans Park. That was at the tail end, of course, here, but it's important to have that designated. Last year, this commission rejected a request by the Edwards Company to allow them to use the park to mobilize for their construction. Nevertheless, since that was said and done and voted on by the commission, they're still mobilizing to this day their construction equipment there. I happened to drive by there on January 28th. I was stuck at the Atlantic Bridge opening, and I saw these cranes in the parking lot that blocked at least a third of the parking lot. I took a couple of pictures of that. Then I happened to come by again on February 4th last week, and that same crane was back in the parking lot. They had roped off at least 17 to 20 parking spaces that could not be used by the public for the public parking. So my request is that the park be designated as historic immediately, or as soon as we can do that. I know the Preservation Trust, I'm on that board, submitted a designation report. I would like to see that pursued. I would suggest, however, one other avenue that we could consider is just enhance the deed restrictions that already exist on that property. The deed restrictions would go a long way to stop the encroachments that are currently going on and to protect it while the consideration is ongoing about the designation. The deed restrictions can be done really in a week or two. I'd be glad to help draft them if necessary. But that's my ask of the commissioners this afternoon. I have a couple of pictures I took on both those days which show the cranes and the parking being cordoned off. So I have pictures for all the commissioners in it and to introduce them to the record. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Zeller.
Kelly Barrett, 1201 Seaspray Avenue, Delray Beach. Good afternoon, City Commission. I currently serve as the Vice President of the Delray Beach Preservation Trust. But today I want to make it clear that I'm speaking on my own behalf as a resident and taxpayer in Delray Beach. For over a decade, I've been an advocate for historic preservation in Delray Beach, and I have supported commission candidates who made preservation a top priority. Last March, the three candidates who swept the election, Tom, and Julie, all had historic preservation front and center in their campaigns. These three candidates did not have nearly as much money as their opponents, who were all overwhelmingly funded by developers. But what Tom, and Julie had was a message that resonated with voters who were fed up with the overdevelopment in our downtown. The Atlantic Avenue Historic District has widespread public support in Delray Beach. I know this for a fact because I knocked on doors with candidates in neighborhoods all over the city, and we got an earful of negative feedback about the state of our downtown. Residents want the City Commission to do something proactive to ensure the downtown retains what is left of its character and charm. Previous commissions have made exceptions to our development rules that have resulted in enormous projects that take years to complete, plaguing our downtown with construction that never seems to end. The election of Tom, and Julie signaled that residents wanted a change, not more of the same. And as we know, history has a way of repeating itself. Anyone considering running for re-election will be judged based on their voting record, not by their campaign bank account. I urge the City Commission and Mayor to honor their campaign promises and honor the history of Delray Beach by supporting the Atlantic Ave Historic District. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. John Miller, 1502 Fenton Drive, Delray Beach. So Linda, I looked it up. My great-grandfather built that, so Linda's my cousin. So that's 800,000 today in 2025 numbers versus 92,000 in 1968. So Atlantic Avenue, I think, would outperform that by about 20 times, because if somebody offered me to buy 7 parcels on Atlantic for 800 grand, I think I'd jump at that. Historic preservation was the impetus that really began Delray's renaissance 20, 30 years ago. And I'm afraid some people in the community want to kind of turn our backs on that and kind of kill the golden goose. And I think it is wise to listen to all voices and hear what everybody has to say, and there are many viewpoints and many different stakeholders here, but we need to do something. So whether it's a historic district, which I'm in favor of, a conservation district, which would be a good number 2, or individually designated other parcels or stricter LDRs, that would be third. Like what Price said, I would say, please don't do nothing. Let's do something, debate the merits of that, and then we can move forward. Demos with no replacement, bad idea. Let's definitely, put that into effect. There's other things that we can do. I'm looking at some of these things like the arcade building, for example. That's one of our gems downtown. There is zero right now, nothing that anybody could do to stop a demolition of that building if somebody came in and filed the paperwork to do so. It might not be fiscally wise to do that for somebody, but if somebody, like you said, bought up that entire block from 4th to 5th, it could happen, or 3rd to 4th. So there's a lot, I think, of good things that are on the table here. I think we just need to make a decision, move forward, take a vote, and move on. And then we can debate the merits of it at some point. But like we said in the early comments, it should have been done years ago. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Hi, good afternoon. Laura Simon. First with the Downtown Development Authority. You recognize that our board reviewed this presentation and request back in June of 2024. So it's been a while. and lots, our board's almost completely changed, which I wish we would have had an opportunity to review it again. However, they did also receive some stakeholder input, which did lead to the decision of not supporting the historic, but also throughout the discussion of much that was discussed here today is, again, how do we preserve the character, the charm? Our downtown is, for me, born and raised here, it is home, right? And it is growing, and it is a place where it is unique in our area of South Florida. Our main street runs straight, through the downtown to the ocean, and has a great mixture. And this is an East Atlantic Avenue historic district that you're talking about, so it's not the entire Atlantic Avenue. It's just East Atlantic Ave, and with an overlay of the OSHA district. So there's I think there's definitely a concern from many that we heard that it is the challenge of when you designate something historic, the challenge that the property owner or the business owner will have to go through internally with the city process. And we are hearing that not only just now with it's not just historic. So I think there's definitely needs for if this is going through or with the process, that there needs to be an enhanced process for commercial throughout the development throughout the downtown. The values are increasing, as we know, but I do think we've got a lot of valuable structures in there and very responsible property owners currently with a lot of our historic buildings, from Swinton to the bridge. Atlantic Avenue Bridge is historic, but we are growing in the place for people, and it's not just within the change in the structures. But demo, to John's point, demo can happen, and that is a fear. It happened with the Buddha Sky Bar. That was where my grandparents lived when they first got here, and it was our building when it was Bob's Bar, and overnight it was demoed down and restructured and rebuilt to look exactly the same, which is ironic. But overall, personally, I think there's definitely a need and a concern, and I just really hope that we can be engaged in that conversation. So,
thank you very much, Ms. Simon.
Afternoon, commissioners, staff. Greg Snyder. I live at 3324 Lakeview Drive in Delray, and as I'm sure most of you know, I'm chairman of the Planning and Zoning Board, but I'm here to speak as an individual on my own behalf, not for that. And I'll keep it really short because I think everybody said almost everything there is to say. I support the historic district. I think the important thing is the goal of, as we all agree, maintaining the charm and the character of Delray. And one of the important parts of that is that's what drives the economics of this city, the tourism that comes in because of that. And everybody is against the demolitions, and I think we all are, but we need to think about just maintaining the character, and I'm not sure that a conservation district will accomplish that, but maybe it will. But personally, I think a historic district would be a better solution. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, 5 minutes more remaining for the 30-minute protocol.
That's right. We'll yield 1 minute to Mr. Long.
George Long, 46 North Swinton. 1 minute. If you guys screw up, it will be the worst decision ever made in the history of Delray Beach. I'm just making it short. Also, there's a proverb, opportunity knocks once. I'm for historic district.
Thank you, sir.
Commissioners, staff, I'm Jim Chard. I live at 401 Southeast 4th Avenue, and I too served on the Always Delray board. I think I was vice chair for a short time, and am currently the chair of the Historic Preservation Board. I think you're hearing a lot of consensus up here tonight, and that there are some things that can be done to make it even more appealing. I do hear often about the process being untimely and costly and painful, and if there's some way through your direction some of that can be expedited, I think that would be good. I think also there's some other incentives that could be put on the table that have been discussed, and that is that the tax incentives be increased. That I think they're now 10 years. They could be extended to 15 years, or the rate of the reduction could be increased, so that we do need to understand that the property owners do have literally a vested interest, but there should be some ways to encourage them to be more supportive of a historic district.
Thank you, Mr. Chard.
David Harden, 1395 Northwest 22nd Avenue. Just a bit of background in case anyone doesn't know, I have a master's degree in city planning and worked as a planner for 6 years before becoming a manager. Now, my first personal choice would be for an historic district. If that's not possible, you have to look at what's politically realistic. If that's not possible, then I think a conservation district is a good way to go. And as a planner, if I were going to draft a conservation district, I think I would spend some time talking to all the stakeholders, talk to the owners, talk to the commissioners, talk to people who are on Atlantic Avenue, ask them why they're there, what is it about Atlantic that attracts them, and really try to find the commonalities in the character of this part of our city that make it what it is that we want to see preserved. And I think with that information, you can put together something that written especially for Atlantic Avenue that would ensure that it would function as the economic engine it is today for a long time to come. Thank you.
Thank
I
you,
would
Mr.
like to
Harden.
add that Mr. Harden put his money where his mouth was because he designated his own house before he listed it.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I remember the pictures of the old house floating down the intercoastal.
Hi, I'm Matt Gracie. I'm a founding member of the CRA way back when. I own a number of properties in downtown. I will not be affected by this ordinance or overlay, so I'm not here just to protect my own property. I'm very worried about a historical overlay. First off, because I think it's really about no growth, and it's nice to hear about the flexibility and so forth, but what we're seeing in the residential areas is it's very inflexible in many cases. So I am very worried about property rights for those on Atlantic Avenue who've invested a ton of money, and all of a sudden now they have all these new restrictions and so forth. So trust me, I love historical buildings. I do not want to see our historical gems torn down. I think it's the hardest thing a commission and planning and zoning and development services do is try to balance the growth and no growth, because of course you're going to have a whole bunch of people in reaction to the horribleness of Atlantic crossings and the density and the failure of leadership to stop something like that in our town. You're going to see that reaction here saying, we need to just stop all this. Well, you can't do that in the long run. And if we put a historical overlay, it's going to take a long time. You're going to have so much opposition to removing that when we're not facing the threats of the Atlantic crossing type density, that it's forever going to become this restricted kind of Disney World town. Even though we hear flexibility, the reality is bureaucracy becomes very inflexible very often. So I think it needs more work. I love hearing about the conservation district idea. Again, LDR is being strengthened. You have a lot of levers to pull. You don't have to just put an overlay and say, okay, we're going to stop this right now. I think it's the wrong decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gracie.
And Mr. Mayor, we are at the 30-minute mark.
You are What did Johnny Carson say? This is the last card? So you're it.
Hi, Steve Cohen, live at 1140 Bohemia Road. I've been a developer in town for 38 years, probably as long as Mr. Gracie. And I agree with what he said about the historic overlay. It really scares me as to values and what we can do. And another layer, Delray isn't organically a historic downtown. They're trying to manufacture a historic district, and I don't think that's going to be successful. I think it will hurt the development and the money that we get to run the city from the downtown. I will say that in 2010, the Palm Beach County tax distributions to the city of Delray Beach through the DDA was $460,510,729. In 2022, those same distributions were now $1,543,070,688. There's nothing broken. Our town has the charm. It's rocking. It's a beautiful success. It's a great success story. There's no need to interfere with us property owners and how we run it and how we keep it going. It's working just fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to ask if that's the last public comment, if I could be
That is the last
indulged
public
for a
comment
moment.
that we are finished with public comment.
Because I continue to hear these anecdotal references to how long everything takes. And I would just fire this shot across the bow, everybody. The software improvements that we make allow us to see when a comment was issued, when a plan has come in that has changed, how long it took for that to be reviewed, and when the permits were issued. Building has been on this system, and I can see everything, and I will tell you that we average a 2-day review period on building. Planning will be on that same system as of June or July. We're working on the launch. There's a lot of data that moves over, and I look forward to that change. I'd also like to say, in terms of the way that we are legally required to handle projects, is that we only accept complete projects. That's not the way the city was doing things 10 years ago. If you don't have a complete application, we're too busy, frankly. So there's a 10-day sufficiency period once you have submitted a complete project or application for us to review it to make sure, not a 20, as was cited for another municipality. State of Florida gives you 10. Once it's found to be sufficient, it moves through TAC. And while the code gives the reviewers 30 days to provide reviews, the team knows the expectation for simple projects, level 1s, level 2s is a 2-week turnaround. It's a 3-week turnaround if it's more complicated. And then you've got the Atlantic crossings and the Sunday villages, which are their own animals. The state of Florida requires that you be taken to your quasi-judicial hearing within 180 days. So that we can accomplish that, we require resubmittals within 60 days. And if you need more than 60 days, you have to request an extension, and I sign those daily because our applicants regularly request extensions. I'd also like to say that every comment you get from city employees is in writing, and it is dated, and you are to resubmit. You are required to tell us how you responded to that comment in writing, and you can say acknowledged, or you can say the setback has been updated on sheet A12 and A23. We're dealing with professionals here. And I would also like to say that if you don't resubmit within 60 days, we either close the file or you're going to get a denial because you don't meet the code. We're busy. Our applicants, architects, and contractors are busy, and I think sometimes it's easy for them to sort of say, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Client, the city is taking too long. I would just caution you, as we get more and more sophisticated with our software, it's very easy for me to print a screen and show you when we got applications submitted. You have 3 people dedicated to 600 historic properties in this city. That is all Michelle Hoyland, Hewitt, and Katharina Poliwata do. Everyone else, the other applications are handled by the bulk of the planning team. We move through a total of 775 applications each year. That's just planning applications. In the last quarter, we issued more than 2,500 permits, and we intook another 1,553. So I can give you lots of data, and I will be able to give you more and more data because of the major software, investment that was made a couple of years ago. So I think anecdotally saying things take long, I think is unfair to the team that works really hard here, and I take exception to it.
Thank you for your comments. We're to the commission now. Who would like to go first? No, you can go first. You have a lot to say.
Thank you. And I'll forego my prior comment, but I think there was some people misunderstood your support because some of the things that were being said, and I was one of them. So forgive me, but it's not because. Anyway, Anthea, thank you for that clarification. So, do you think that if you had more, in other words, a lot of what we're hearing is the whole hesitation on this is the process being too slow, and I am now understanding that that's probably not the case. But do you think if you had a few more people employed in that department, would it make a difference? Because if that's the hesitation, we should be able to rectify this problem pretty immediately.
So I would say fairly, I think it's two things. And several of you have reached out to me on different issues. I remember Commissioner Burns came to me on a permit, and I was able to give you that printout that said, well, my staff had it 12 days and your applicants had it 188. And you were like, I'm done with this meeting. I took her paper and was satisfied. I do think, though, that the Historic Preservation Board, I think of the boards that we have, they understand their mandate and they take their authority seriously and their purview seriously, and they are a tough board to get through, I think, to be fair. I would also say that with the success of Delray Beach, we're not begging for redevelopment. We're not where we were 30 years ago when we established a CRA. And I would, as much as I am a pro-business and we are striving to maintain a higher level of service and streamline processes, we're not begging for redevelopment. So I would suggest the other boards need to be as discerning as the Historic Preservation Board is when they are applying our architecture design guidelines, because once the developer is gone, our city, that building becomes part of our city for the next 100 years, and it should be as great as the rest of our city is.
Right.
So I do think that the board is a tougher board.
Thank you.
And that might be it.
Okay. But staff-wise is what I was asking specifically. Do you feel you need more people in that department now?
I think for building, to be fair, we have positions that we're unable to fill because we don't have seats yet. We are working towards, with the improvement with the train station, being able to change things. Michelle, if you're specifically asking about historic and her team's workload, she can provide more detail.
Barring the Sunday Village type project, because just when one of those things lands on our desk,
it's overwhelming.
We do digital plan review, but we also will have to do paper just to get the lay of the land because it's such a big project. And our partners at PEB have been amazing. And I call them partners because we work together as a team through that whole review process. So aside from our big project like that, it's our goal to hit a 2-week milestone to get comments out the door. Now, our assistant director and I were talking about this recently, and she's like, oh, you're doing better than the 30 days. I had completely forgot that we had 30 days in the code. I thought it was 2 weeks. So we're turning comments around, and it's a 14 to 16, 17-day time frame upon the time the TAC review was distributed. As far as more staff, I'm going to be very cautious on this because I've been asked this question by a commission before, and I'm not going to speak out of turn. But there are 3 of us, thanks to the task force, who added 2 additional positions. I will say right now we have a part-time planner in training, which is kind of like a little higher position than intern, and she's been amazing. So that small bit of that student person really adds quite a bit to our efficiency because we can pass research to her and say, go research. So I don't know that it would make a difference to have additional staff.
Thank you.
For me personally, what I would love is to know the individual experiences that I'm hearing on a generalized comment today from people who have never submitted into the process. Where is the comment coming from?
Right.
Who was the applicant?
Yeah.
How can we get better?
Right.
I'm a big constructive criticism person, so I'm sitting here jotting notes. What can we be
I noticed
doing?
that. Thank you.
I want to see the process go faster. What is it that we can do? What is the complaint? Is it the difference of hiring a bona fide historic preservation architect or somebody who's never, ever come through the city? What is it?
Maybe we can try to figure that out, because if that is what's
we wanna
holding
get
this
better.
amazing thing up,
Yeah.
that is really unfortunate.
I think it's a statement that's an easy scapegoat for hiding behind what the real issue is.
Thank
But
you.
I won't say more.
Okay, thank you. So what I'll say is I knocked on over 5,000 doors when I ran, and this is overwhelmingly popular. This was initiated by the residents and the commission a very long time ago. Like back in 2017, a task force was created. Over $60,000 of money was put into the study, the experts, and, as Ms. Hoyland would say, tons of staff time, because it's widely popular. And, you know, when the idea of a conservation district first came up, Anthea, you and I discussed this, because any research will tell you a conservation district is utilized by cities that have already lost their concentration of historic structures. It's an afterthought when you really are late to the game. It should not be your first thought. It's truly just a zoning tool, and we have zoning tools. And it's utilized in neighborhoods that are not eligible for historic designation due to incompatible alterations. So it should not be our first choice. The laws in a conservation district don't provide the same level of scrutiny or protections, and that's what we're really looking for. The residents want that, because it just takes a 3 vote here to get anything done. And that's the reason why the historic districts serve our residents. They do it for years to come. We've all seen it. I don't want to talk about politics. More money goes into our elections every single cycle, and all it takes is 3 votes to monumentally change our city. And the residents don't want it to change. So our comp plan even suggests what I just said. You put it up there, HPE 128. It's an alternative when we have failed to incorporate historic districts and your concentration of historic structures has been compromised. We are so lucky here. We are not at that point. We will be if we don't act today, but we are not at that point. A conservation district does not reinforce preservation of existing architecture, and that's what we want to do. It's just a zoning tool that can be outvoted by 3 people sitting up here. And that, to me, is not what we should be doing. The benefits have been expressed to the residents in the course of 5 years over and over and over again. We had 4 experts come in and speak at the symposium to the benefits. They strengthen our economy. They enhance our property values. They affirm our community's values. And that's why we're discussing this, because our community wants this. And they have said it. And they increase historic tourism. And another thing to state about the benefits, they're in our comp plan, HPE DIA 16. There is a study that was done by the Florida Department of State and the Florida Commission together. The study looked at the economic impact of historic preservation, and the study said property values that are within a historic district compared to those outside show an astounding benefit within. Astounding, that's the word that's used. Property within the district increased in value over time, even during declines across the entire state. So while the whole state was declining their property values, these historic areas continue to increase. It's not my information. I'm not pulling out of the air. It is in a study done by the Florida Department of State and the Florida Commission. So the idea about the benefits, we have to agree that that is no longer something that we should concern ourselves. And, you know, I would like to improve the city process if we can, and try to have people appreciate what this brings, because really so many people in these districts on Atlantic Avenue are going to come to us for changes that they aren't entitled to currently, but could be with a historic district in place. And I think, Mr. Harding, you said it best. Is this politically realistic? Because at the end of the day, that is exactly what this is about. This is about politics. Some people don't want it politically, but the residents do. And I tell you what, residents will remember how we vote. Thank you.
Commissioner Burns.
Thank you.
Did you want to go last?
No, I'm fine. I don't have that much to say. I just want to thank the staff for the excellent job that you've done on the research. I read through this, and I've read through some things last year, and this has been going on for quite some time, and I'm wondering why it wasn't done years ago. I saw that comment someplace. But, it's obvious that we do love our Main Street, and I understand that we have code that currently maintains the safeguard, that's structured that it does maintain some of the safeguards. One of the comments was that we need to prevent some of the things that we don't want. I would love to hear what those things are. We have guidelines in place that keeps it to 3 stories. We have guidelines in place in our LDR. So I would love to hear some of the opposite side of what are some of the things that the community doesn't want, the residents doesn't want. In line with what the mayor says, we do have to make sure that we have to make this thing fair. It has to be, the process has to have integrity, and it has to be fair. The property owners cannot be penalized. Our citizens should not be penalized. I know that when I was a little girl, there's nothing in the community that looks like it did when I was a little girl. So nothing looks the same. And I heard my colleague talk about the conservation district, and my thought process was that we really should look into that as being an option. I don't know about it being first, but I think that we should look at that as being an option. I understand that has the demolition controls and that it would require some LDR amendments. However, I think that it is an option. We need to look at what's going to be fair. And we do need to be realistic. And I like the idea someone said that look at each building individually. Sometimes you just can't put everything in one pot. You do have to take and look at things individually. So I am in agreement that we do need to do something. This has been going on and lingering long enough, so we do need to hopefully leave here today with some clear direction to staff so that you know where you're going with it. That's all we got.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to make a few quick statements. You didn't misunderstand my support for preserving Atlantic Avenue. I said all along I want to preserve Atlantic Avenue. We may have different methods of getting there, but I'm absolutely in support of preserving, and I've always said and continue to say that the scale, the charm, the scope, the feel need to be protected because it is a jewel of the city. But in many places, the actual stakeholders get a vote as to whether or not they want to be considered historic or not. And while you say the residents want to do this, we also have stakeholders that are not irrelevant to the process. And you are imposing something on them saying, well, this is what the residents want. I don't do mob rule. I want to protect everybody's interests and go down the middle, and I compromise, and people keep saying I kick things down the road. This is because, as Mr. Long said very eloquently, if we get this wrong, well, I don't even want to think about getting it wrong. We can't get this wrong. So, and while they had 4 experts come to speak, I was at that meeting as well. There was no testimony offered at all as to, well, is there another solution? Is this really the right thing we should do? The company that gave the presentation was a historic preservation company. That's what they were hired to do, come up with a historic preservation plan. And and as I've said to you before, look, I happen to be against fracking, but I can get a letter from the American Petroleum Institute saying fracking is the best thing in the world. Well, because if a company who's designed to do historic preservation, of course they're going to tell you that. And the increasing value of the properties is there is evidence to support that, but they're typically residential neighborhoods. They're not commercial neighborhoods. I mean, I've gone through the entire list. typically. Secondly, they're usually contiguous to other areas. This has natural boundaries of Swinton on one side and Federal Highway or the Intercoastal, whichever is ultimately decided. So you're within a defined boundary. So it's not the same construct that you have when you say it improves value. And by the way, I wouldn't say that we are in need. One of Mr. Gracie, I think it was he that said, that it's not like we're in need of revitalization of our downtown. I mean, let's be fair here. We are doing pretty well on our own, and yeah, I guess to some extent everything is about politics. When we're sitting up here, we all ran for election. It was called political. We're political, figures, and democracy works that way. So because one group wants it and the other group doesn't, I think everybody's views need to be represented. And I like the conservation district. And by the way, I have modifications to what you guys said on conservation districts, because I do think we need to have tighter rules on changing facades. I wouldn't have my conservation, and what Mr. Harden said, you want to specially design it that works for Delray. I don't want a conservation. I like the preservation of facades. I think that's a very important element of the city. That gives us part of our what I talk about: look, feel, charm. Everything. I like that, and I like tighter guidelines. I mean, we have the ability to do tighter guidelines. And we should do it because it is such an important part of it. And I've had this conversation since I was here in 2012 when the first Atlantic Crossing came up, which I did not support, as everyone knows, the aggregation of properties. It allows, and there's going to be some friends that I know that are not going to be happy with this statement, but the reality is I don't think you should be able to have you have a parcel here and be able to aggregate property. Suddenly you can build something that really doesn't suit the neighborhood. I think we should have parcel control. You build on your parcel, that's your parcel. And you can buy 3 parcels, but they got to look different. They got to look and feel like they were. And that's just extremely important. I think, under the classic rules, sometimes demolition wouldn't be reviewed. I think demolition has to be reviewed. I think we have to look at that's something that is incorporated both in conservation and in historic. We have to be able to know what we're pulling down. And by the way, I do think we ought to know what they're going to put up. So that's not a classic thing, but I think that's, in my opinion, that's what I would like to see. And I've got, timing here. I've written down timing a few times because that remark was made. We do need to have, as it relates to this, some pretty strict timing guidelines. Because as I said, there's a lot of money that some of these properties have. And I know I've heard your remarks. And notwithstanding your remarks, I will tell you that there's other people that disagree with those timing remarks. But we'll put that aside. So we do need to have, timing. So those are. And I think the conservation district, it's not a historic district, but it gets you 80% there, and it protects the property right. And it allows us we already have in place, as you said, almost all the components of a conservation district now. So let's just close the loop, bring in the aggregation of the properties, give us control over the facades, tighten our guidelines a bit, and bring in the demolition control. Then we're over 80% there. And because the reality is people keep saying, well, they're going to tear this down. They can't park it. It's very easy to say, well, we're going to tear this down. Well, if you tear something down, number one, unless it was down with an act of God, which is a different rule, which we've had some fun bantering about, but you're subject to the new setbacks. You're subject to the new parking. So it's not so easy to say this is going to happen because they can't park it. They can't just add a level to their building and say, well, I'm going to do this to the building. They can't. They got to be able to park it. So we have some very good guidelines as it relates to parking finally, and I'm very happy with the changes we made. And so that the historic properties are going to get, some real benefits with the in lieu, and we should be allowing people to opt in. I think that's a great ability. If people want to opt into the things, and by the way, not pay a fee if they opt in. Let's make it easy to opt in. If you want to opt into the historic protections, let them do it, but they don't have to pay the fee. There's a lot of ways to get where you want to go without imposing it on people, and that's my thing, and I spoke because I saw the clock and I didn't mean to do that. You're next. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you. As Ms. Barrett said, I campaigned vigorously on the historic district. Like Julie, I knocked on 5,000 or 6,000 doors, and I pride myself on being a really good listener. And the residents overwhelmingly support the historic district. Overwhelmingly. You know, our core is our charm on Atlantic Avenue. It is. That charm has been eroded recently by some decisions made by previous commissions. I think everybody in the room mostly would nod their head on that. And I think that that's a shame. I think we have to approve the historic district. I think it's time. Due respect, Mr. Mayor, and I don't like an 80% solution, because now you got 20% of wiggle room, and these poor ladies are busy now. Wait till we open the door for more wiggle room. I mean, that's what's going to happen. And I think we're at a bit of a crossroads here. As I said, previous commission approved some stuff that I wouldn't have approved. And I think if we want to maintain that charm, and we want our kids to have that downtown area that we all love, and we want it to look kind of the same, I don't think we have a choice here. And I think the majority of the residents want it, and I'm firmly in favor of the historic designation. So I hope we all support that. Bravo.
All right, last but not least here. So I think an Atlantic Avenue Historic District is a noble pursuit. And I want to thank staff for years of hard work on this, and all the residents and advocates who are very passionate about this issue. I think we all agree in spirit with the concept of a historic district, right? It's the execution where things get tricky. We all agree, everyone in this room agrees that we need to protect our downtown historic charm, the integrity of our downtown and our history. We all agree on that. That's a no-brainer, right? We all get that. But there are some realities that as a commission, we have to consider, unfortunately. Oftentimes up here, we do have to compromise and create situations where no one's completely happy, because we have to listen to many voices with different perspectives and different agendas. That's the reality. So we have to consider a few things, one of those being the current structure of our historic review process. And I appreciate the staff talking about and I know you guys work hard. I know you're as efficient as you can be within the current structure, but I wouldn't get complaints about being hung up in this process as regularly as I do, which is about weekly, if there weren't issues. And again, I'm not blaming you guys. I know we're understaffed. I know we're going through a transition to digital. I know there are issues, but the reality is to create a logjam by forcing everything on Atlantic Ave to go through this process, I don't think is the right approach. That being said, I'll just move on to my next point for now. So there's also potential for litigation here that I brought up before. I'm not going to march down the road of creating potential litigation from our property owners. That to me would be a reckless thing to do. The other issue is it keeps being presented this way that the residents here are overwhelmingly in support of this. Well, our DDA voted against it. They represent all of our business owners downtown. This isn't something that everyone is in support of. There is some disagreement on this, and that's why we have to listen to both sides. So I think the conservation district idea is a compromise. It gives us some flexibility and some wiggle room while we figure out things on our end. The big issue here, right, the main issue that we need to address is aggregation. I think we can all agree on that, right? The main issue is aggregation of too many properties that allows developers to build these giant monolithic things downtown. That's the main issue. If we can use a conservation district to address that issue, I think we're in a good place. If we can use it to address facade changes, right, to our architect, I think we need to discuss, I brought this up many times, our architectural review process. I think we should get rid of masonry modern at this point. I've brought that up like 10 times. Let's just get rid of it. Seriously, that's fine.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, guys.
It's not an action item, I know, but
can we make motions?
I'm putting it on the list.
But seriously, I mean, let's use this as a tool to address facade changes as well, and absolutely, let's use it as a tool to reduce and prevent demolition and control it. I mean, those are the things we need to address here. I think a historic district is a blunt instrument to address these same issues. So, I want to briefly address the Veterans Park thing too. But by the way, I think Conservation District is where I'm at for now. That isn't obvious. But since we're short on time, I want to at least touch on the Veterans Park thing. I'm happy to move that along to staff. I have no issue there. But I will say, I want to be careful that we're not creating any delays, because I didn't agree with not using it for staging, because I did not want to delay that project by 2 more years and put residents through all the construction for longer. So as long as we're able to do that without creating any further delays, I'm on board with moving the process along, and I'll be supportive. But yeah, I think that we have to make compromises up here sometimes. Spirit of a historic district is great, but I think we have to keep the stakeholders and property owners in mind as well, and our downtown economy in mind as well. So that being said, I'm going to be in support of moving forward to instruct staff to look into a conservation district and continue the conversation.
By the way, I'm going to offer some, and others who didn't discuss veterans also. Obviously, nobody wants that park to be anything other than a park. I've said that, again, for longer than most in this town have been here. But I had a very good conversation with Mr. Zeller the other day regarding the best way to preserve it as a park. I give by way of example the city's problem they're having with the fire station, with that little easement that sits there in that property. Isn't that the fire station where you have there's that easement problem? I'm talking about the ability, because at any given... No, I read the trades. So, in order to, because as Commissioner Casal rightly pointed, any 3 votes can change anything. So we can make Veterans Park historic, and 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, somebody can say, we want to do something else there. And the commission comes up and they do it. It's a hard process, but if the city really wants it, they can get that designation moved. What they can't get removed is if we increase our deed restrictions to ensure that it always remains as a public park. And that's stronger. This commission could never change that. And I think that that's the better way to preserve the park, because it's got more teeth in it than anything that's been recommended. If you really care what it's going to be in 50 years, do the deed restrictions. And I say that as a land use person, because we have done them very, very successfully, mostly up north, but they're allowed down here. And you preserve your back portions there for recreation, and the city still owns the park, but it always has to stay a park. And I offer that for consideration. You're going to go do what you do, and I just, that's, again, I want it to stay a park. If everyone thinks historic's the best way to get there, that's fine. But understand, 3 votes can get rid of that designation, and that's a very valuable piece of land that I never want to have anything other than a park. And so I'm really trying to give it, which would be against my interest if I ever represented somebody to try to do that. But I'm just saying, it really puts teeth into that. But that's me. So would anyone else like to comment on that?
No, actually, Anthea spoke to me about that maybe a couple months ago, that would be the route to take if you really want to ensure what stays there, and I agree.
I want 100 years from now that to be a park.
But are we still going to talk about the historic aspect as well? Are you supporting that in addition? Both?
I'm happy to make it historic, because there are some historic components there.
Right.
My only caution on that is I want to make sure that the recreation portion has some flexibility, that we're not married to saying we got to do lawn bowling or we have to do croquet, which hasn't been played in 5 years.
Do we have to decide? Should we be?
Well, I don't know that we need to decide that now. It's just, okay. I'm just throwing that on the table so that I put it on the record what my concerns were. I actually had the opportunity to take Mr. Patton, and I saw Ann over there a second ago. But we all went to visit the National Croquet Center, and there's a great opportunity for that spot to be a croquet field. I had Sam Mitot out there with the guy who was head of the foundation there up in Florida Mango, and there's a league. There's 100 players in the little club, and I didn't realize any of this. I'm just saying, it would create some activity for the park. What I'm trying to do is to take the temptation to try to do something with that land away from any developer because it would be a bona fide recreational use. Takes the temptation away. And I want to really and truly preserve it. That was my whole idea with taking people to see the croquet. Because if croquet worked, and look, it may be something else in 10 years.
So you're thinking croquet and lawn bowling, but separate and aside from that, you're asking us for direction with respect to the
I'm happy
deed
to-
restriction. I
with
think
those-
we'll all
with-
agree.
as long
I
as we're-
agree with that. We
as long as there's
discussed that.
flexibility in the recreation
And,
side, I'm not
are
unhappy
you-
with making it apart.
is
I mean,
that-
a thing.
Are you look?
I mean, I don't think one precludes the other. I think
That's
a
what I'm
deed
saying. I would go with
restriction
both
and-
because I
and
think that
designate
we've
it.
talked about
Pretty
things.
amazing is two things. One, Old School Square has deed restrictions like that.
Right.
From when the transfer of the property from the school board to the city
Mhm.
for
Right.
educational and cultural.
It can only
I
be
mean,
used for that, right?
So it has that layer, plus it has the historic district.
Right, no,
layer
yeah, I'm not opposed to the historic.
Of local and national. But I also want to point out the city marina. So you know that the city marina has gone through an extensive beautification process,
Right.
generators being added, flood prevention happening, gazebos, all kinds of things. They could have done more. But just as a common thing, and for us it's common, but to remind you all, historic districts are not zoning districts. So
Right.
I keep hearing conservation district.
Right.
We should be calling them area, or I love the terminology Ms. Ravellis said, which was heritage.
I like that word. I looked it up actually right away, and I'm
Heritage
embarrassed that
area.
I didn't think of it
I think we
first.
need to give
Been
credit
like-
to Mr. Chard for that, actually.
I think it was Ms. Ravellis and Mr. Charb said that. I've been trying to get the brown signs on 95.
I'll give you credit once, Jim.
that say
You're gonna have to.
National Historic District, get off on Atlantic Avenue. But heritage is really part of it. So it doesn't mean that you're tied in to have it always be shuffleboard, lawn bowling, whatever.
Yeah, that
But
was
if
my
you
only
wanna-
caveat. I didn't want to make sure that we're
Yeah.
preserving it historic, so it's always got to be shuffleboard and lawn
Yeah.
bowling. I
I
want it
mean,
to be
if
a
you-
recreational use.
Community facility,
look.
recreational. I mean, it could be a marina one day, with more parking. Who knows? But
Right.
yeah, I
Well,
think you have that
with
flexibility.
global warming, it may be a marina one day.
And
so.
you can put those controls in an ordinance. So if you come through with a historic district designation, you can add whereas clauses and requirements
Okay.
in your ordinance for things that you want to add to a historic designation.
And by the way, I think the Preservation Trust is happy with this. I mean, I think it preserves what we're trying to do there. They're
But anti-demolition and anti-aggregation and anti-facade changes is pretty much a historic district. So I'm like, I like it.
You're normally not allowed to speak from the gallery. Do you have something to say, Ms. Brett?
One thing to add, it's something I want to ask about. One of the benefits of a historic district is that you can apply for grants.
Mhm.
And the trust offered in our resolution to help with that, to apply for grants. So
I read that. That's right. So that's why I said I'm not opposed to
that's
having.
something that's, you can't get if you put, a conservation overlay. It's one of the benefits. And I just.
I
just think
understand.
That's kind of overlooked with some of the other economic benefits,
I
like
under-
marketing and a historic district.
Understand. I understand the point. I would only say that grants are usually done to help revitalize, and I don't really think Atlantic Avenue is a revitalization. We're done. Thank you. You're from the audience.
Tax.
And then just the other thing, I just want to touch on this with the review that you're hearing, like you're telling me you're hearing complaints. I do want to point out that there's a difference between the commercial property process, whether you're historic or not, versus the single family. If you're not in a district for single family, you go straight to building permits. So there is a bigger jump when a single family residence or area gets designated versus these that are already going to a board for approvals. We can certainly augment administrative approvals for the historic team. There's things we can do to help them streamline, and we'll start looking into those now.
Thank you. Now we need to. We have a 5 o'clock. We have a hard deadline.
Could I just say one thing? Can we
Sure.
just put the historic district on our next agenda to vote it down and be done with it and move on to your whatever zoning tools we're
Well, we're
implementing?
going to be. The purpose of this meeting is to instruct staff. to start working
yeah.
on something.
Right, but we should vote on the historic district officially. I think it's
That's
something
not on.
that's-
It's not on the agenda.
I know, no, I'm not saying here, Mayor, excuse me, I said, could we ask for it to be on the next official city commission
I'm going to
workshop?
follow the procedure. The thing
So you
is,
want me to ask at the meeting? I can ask here for
you
something.
can do it next. You've got
Okay.
the opportunity to do that. This agenda item called that we are to give direction to staff as to what we want them to start developing. So you could vote no, which you clearly
No,
are.
we're not. I'm not saying tonight.
No, I understand.
I'm not
I
talking
understand.
about voting
But
this
I'm not-
evening.
I don't
I'm
wanna
on
start
talking about at the next
City manager's
meeting.
not here. I don't want to start talking about adding things to the agenda. So we have three of us are telling staff, am I correct?
Yes.
To please start exploring the conservation district. Come back with something on the conservation district with all of the comments that we had about the different elements that we want to have us different than Savannah and St. Augustine and Miami Beach and all the rest that have their own. And because we have different needs. And we have we have clear direction from three. We have two that are not giving you that direction.
We would like it the historical.
But do we need a motion
I would-
to? We don't really need a
No.
motion. We're giving you direction for that. So
I think we need a motion and a vote.
You can't vote at a workshop.
Then it needs to be on the next agenda.
no, it's going to come back. The process is it's a public hearing.
I understand.
So the what's coming back is the direction from the commission is to develop an ordinance that's going to be a conservation district with all these other kinds of stuff. You'll have the opportunity to vote against it, but we're not doing a
At
vote
the
now.
next meeting, I will ask for us to put on the agenda for the future a vote on the historic district, so we can officially
It's not-
take
it's
it
not
down.
you're not. I hate to say people. You're not in order, because the direction here is to provide.
No, I'm saying I'll ask at the next meeting.
I'm sorry, there are advertising requirements related to that type of an ordinance that
Right.
I don't know that it would be March 11th at the earliest.
Okay, I'll ask
We're
at the next meeting to have it on the
and
March
The agenda
11th
says
agenda.
provide direction for the next steps. The next
It's
steps
not-
are that, and you've got 3 votes. So
Right,
is
I'm not
there
going
anything else
against
to
the
talk
agenda.
about?
Yeah, no,
Okay,
thank you.
we're adjourned. Now we get to go to the other meeting.